The waitress served the same customer for 6 years, not knowing he was her brother, now a millionaire. Do you believe in fate or the idea that sometimes the most important people in our lives are right under our noses, hidden by an astonishing twist of destiny? Today, you'll hear the unbelievable story of Sophie Johnson, a humble waitress who served the same reserved, enigmatic customer every Tuesday for 6 long years, never suspecting he was connected to her in the most intimate way possible. This is a tale of secrets, shattered dreams, unbreakable bonds, and a family torn apart. Join me on a journey of discovery where heartbreak and triumph collide, and watch how a single revelation changes everything. On a quiet corner in downtown Orlando sat Sunny's Diner, a small family-owned establishment tucked beneath the shadows of taller buildings. Its bright yellow facade, chipped and weathered by the Florida sun, gave off an unpretentious charm. The sign overhead flickered with half-burnt bulbs, a testament to better days long gone. Yet inside, the faint aroma of fried eggs and steaming coffee lingered in the air every morning, drawing in locals with its promise of hearty breakfasts and comforting conversations. This was not a place of grand ambitions or lucrative business deals. It was a humble pit stop for neighbors, busy office workers, and an odd tourist or two. For Sophie Johnson, Sunny's Diner had been a second home for nearly a decade. Even on her days off, she was drawn to its well-worn booths, vinyl seats cracked from thousands of patrons. The white and green tiled floor squeaked under her sneakers, marking her presence with each soft step. At 28 years old, she had her entire life in front of her, yet she felt stuck, like she'd somehow missed the road signs pointing toward a better future. Little did she know how drastically her life would change because of one particular customer who always sat in booth 9. Sophie had come to Orlando when she was 18, fleeing a tragic past in Chicago after her adoptive father, David Hamilton, had passed away. Raised in a modest household by 2 loving but financially strained parents, Sophie had always been taught the value of hard work. She lived by the principle that no job was too small or inconsequential, especially if it meant keeping a roof over her head and maybe sending a few dollars to her aging mother, Laura Hamilton, who still resided in a tiny rental in Illinois. Day after day, Sophie showed up at Sunny's before dawn, washing down the counters, restocking the ketchup bottles, polishing the silverware. She greeted customers with a warm smile that masked her deeper insecurities, a fear that she was destined for a quiet, unremarkable life, with no clue of her true origins. Among the regulars, Sophie recognized every face. There was Miss S. Charlotte Brown, a retired schoolteacher who always ordered the early bird special and left exact change plus a quarter tip. There was Timothy Rogers, a middle-aged postal worker nursing heartbreak after his wife left him 2 years ago. He'd stay for hours with bottomless coffee. And then there was the Tuesday man, a tall, dark-haired figure with broad shoulders, impeccably dressed even at 7 a.m., who quietly slipped into booth 9. He rarely spoke, always tipping generously, and left exactly 1 hour later. In the small ledger Sunny's kept for frequent patrons, he was listed simply as Ryan T. None of the staff knew much about him, only that he worked in real estate or technology, something that allowed him to travel extensively. Over time, Sophie found herself increasingly curious about this mysterious customer. She noticed his faint scar along the hairline above his temple, the slight limp in his left leg that emerged after he'd sit for too long. She observed his choice of black coffee, always piping hot, no cream or sugar. On some Tuesdays, he added a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, on others, just the coffee. Despite her attempts to engage him in light-hearted banter, Ryan T. responded courteously, but never invited more. His grey eyes seemed distant, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime of secrets. Sophie's co-worker, a spirited 19-year-old college student named Rosie Garcia, often teased her about her fascination. "Honestly, Sophie, if you stare any harder, you'll see into his soul," Rosie joked, wiggling her eyebrows. Sophie would laugh it off, attributing her interest to a server's instinct. But something about Ryan T spoke to her at a deeper level. She felt an inexplicable tug, a strange familiarity she couldn't pinpoint, like seeing a stranger's face in a dream and believing they once meant something important. Each Tuesday, as Sophie poured Ryan's coffee, she noticed details about his accessories: a sleek, expensive wristwatch from Rolex, a gold ring with an engraved letter T. She wondered where he'd gotten them, and why someone with such refined taste chose to eat at a modest diner. The staff had grown used to wealthy tourists or business professionals looking for a quick bite, but Ryan was different. He did not complain about the grease on the plates or the chipped coffee cups. He came and left with quiet consistency. Perhaps, Sophie thought, he simply cherished a routine in his otherwise hectic life. Unknown to Sophie, that tall, stoic man was tethered to her by a past neither of them fully understood. Ryan Thompson was his full name. He had grown up in an orphanage in Chicago under the name Ryan Garcia, but was adopted at age 10 by a family named Thompson. After an adolescence filled with confusion and longing, Ryan buried himself in studies and then business, eventually striking gold in real estate developments. By his late 20s, he was a self-made millionaire. The reason he frequented Sonny's was an echo of a story he'd heard long ago, a rumor that someone from his birth family might be in Orlando. That rumor was vague, gleaned from half-buried adoption papers and an anonymous letter claiming your sister relocated to Florida. He had hardly any details. All he knew was that someone from his bloodline might be in the area, possibly connected to a small, family-run eatery. So he visited local diners, scouring faces and hearts for a connection. Sonny's became his last stop in the search, and ironically, it was the very place he kept returning to, perhaps drawn by Sophie's smile or the intangible sense of familiarity. He never outright questioned her about her past. He barely had the nerve to. Instead, he observed, silently collecting clues, uncertain of what he was truly hoping to find. These small moments, her kindness, her gentle voice, how she thoughtfully refilled his coffee, captivated him. He felt an indescribable pull toward her, a sensation that defied logic. But fear held him back. What if she wasn't the sister he was looking for? Worse, what if she was, and she hated him for some reason? Ryan knew that confronting your lost family could unearth heartbreak and stir a hornet's nest of buried truths. For 6 years, he danced around the question, never summoning the courage to take the final leap. Yet he continued to come, Tuesday after Tuesday, as if waiting for fate to orchestrate the perfect moment. Meanwhile, Sophie's life in Orlando had settled into quiet monotony. Outside of work, she rented a room in a cramped apartment building named Maple Grove. Her landlord, Mr. James Levine, was a retired professor who insisted on monthly rent checks dated precisely on the 1st. She had no romantic entanglements to speak of, minus a few casual dates that never blossomed into anything serious. She pictured herself in 10 years still at Sonny's, still chasing illusions about a better life. Little did she know she was on the brink of a discovery that would realign her entire understanding of who she was and who she loved. Sophie's earliest childhood memories were hazy. She recalled a cramped apartment in Chicago, faint images of a woman who smelled like lavender and a man whose face stayed mostly in the shadows. Before she turned 4, she was moved into foster care, bouncing from one family to another until David and Laura Hamilton adopted her at age 6. Although they were a loving couple, David and Laura couldn't dispel Sophie's yearning to know why her biological parents had disappeared. Her only clue was a half-burnt photo, found in a box of old records at age 16, showing a baby with S. Garcia scrawled on the back. In time, Sophie accepted that some questions might never be answered. She turned her attention to school, forging friendships with classmates who never quite understood the sadness in her eyes. She excelled academically, receiving small scholarships for college. But David's unexpected death from a heart attack when Sophie was just 18 forced her to drop out and find work to support both herself and her adoptive mother. They struggled to make ends meet, and when a distant relative in Orlando offered Sophie a place to crash for a few months, she uprooted her life and left Chicago for good. Yet Chicago never truly left her. The city had shaped her, the cold winters, the spirited chatter of neighbors in overcrowded streets, the smell of pizza wafting from local joints, and the unanswered question of who she really was. The name Garcia from the burnt photo continued to haunt her. She wasn't sure if it was her actual surname or a clue to someone else in her birth family. When she found a modest sense of stability in Orlando and eventually heard that a new property development company named Thompson Interstate was expanding into Florida, it barely registered. She'd seen Ryan Thompson in a business magazine once, but the name meant nothing to her at the time. Now, ironically, that same man was sitting a few feet away every week, sipping coffee, presumably there for her, yet he remained just out of reach. She chalked up his consistent visits to an eccentric habit. If anything, she admired how he carried himself with confidence but didn't boast about his success. Plenty of wealthy customers waltzed in and showed off their gold cards, but Ryan never demanded special treatment or bragged about his achievements. One Tuesday afternoon after the brunch rush, Sophie finally took a chance. Gathering her courage, she walked over to him with a refill pot. "So you must really like this place if you keep coming back for 6 years, she said with a light laugh. "You know, there are other diners in Orlando too." Ryan looked up, and for a brief moment, Sophie thought she saw a flicker of emotion, almost like relief. He offered a thin smile. "I guess I'm a creature of habit," he replied quietly, nodding his thanks as she refilled his mug. "You serve good coffee." "That's a generous compliment for diner coffee," Sophie teased. "Well, sometimes the simplest things are the best," Ryan said, glancing at the swirling steam. A gentle silence passed between them. Sophie felt her heart flutter, a strange sense of déjà vu as she looked into his eyes. She mentally scolded herself for feeling flustered around a customer. She hurried back behind the counter, cheeks warming, while Ryan let out a slow breath. Every day he imagined how he might break the truth to her, how he might say, "I think we might be related." But he lacked certainty, and fear of rejection paralyzed him. Elsewhere in Orlando, one of Ryan's hired investigators, Mark Bradley, was discreetly combing through old archives and adoption records, attempting to piece together the mosaic of Ryan's early life. They had found a few leads indicating that Ryan was born Ryan Garcia to a mother named Angela M. Garcia, who'd abandoned him as an infant. A father's name was missing. Another clue pointed to the birth of a girl, Sofia Maria Garcia, the very next year. The orphanage records were incomplete, yet the evidence was compelling. There might be a full sibling or half-sibling. They traced some movement from Chicago to Florida, but couldn't confirm an exact location for Sophia. Ryan felt guilty enlisting a private investigator. Something about rummaging through Sophie's past felt invasive. Still, he believed the end justified the means if it reunited him with his sister. 6 years had passed, and each Tuesday as he watched Sophie bustling with trays and coffee pots, he felt both hope and dread. He noticed how natural she was at caring for others, her small gestures of empathy, her gentle words to a distressed mother with a crying baby, the way she offered to help her co-workers even when they were off their shifts. Everything he saw in her told him, "This is a good person, possibly the only real family I have." Back in Chicago, the mother he never knew was rumored to live in a run-down neighborhood, lost to substance abuse and cyclical poverty. Ryan's adoptive parents, the Thompsons, had given him all the material comforts, but never the warmth he longed for. Their relationship was cordial, even supportive in a financial sense, yet it lacked true closeness. Now, at age 34, with a successful company at his back, Ryan yearned not just for a sense of belonging, but also for forgiveness, if indeed Sophie was his sister. He regretted not searching sooner, but life, as it often does, got in the way. For her part, Sophie sensed an undercurrent of intrigue in her life. She couldn't shake this growing feeling that something monumental was just beyond her reach. On slow afternoons, when customers thinned out, she caught herself daydreaming about traveling, perhaps returning to Chicago to piece together her past, or maybe searching for leads about any living relatives. She told herself it was a foolish fantasy, that the time for closure had passed, but in the quiet she yearned for answers. If only she knew how close those answers actually were. 6 years of polite conversation and fleeting eye contact culminated in a rainy Tuesday in late August, when all the tension that had been brewing finally broke. The day began ominously with torrential thunderstorms and howling winds that rattled the diner's windows. The neon signs sputtered and died, leaving Sunny's diner cloaked in dull grey light. Fewer people ventured out in the storm, so the place was nearly deserted when Ryan Thompson stepped through the door, umbrella dripping water onto the checkered floor. Sophie, who was drying her hair from a quick dash outside to take out the trash, greeted him with a sympathetic grin. "Rough weather, huh? Take a seat. Let me get you some coffee." Before he could respond, the lights flickered and then went out completely. A collective groan rose from the staff. The backup generator kicked in, casting a feeble glow from a single overhead fixture. For the first time in her memory, Sunny's was empty except for the staff and a single customer, Ryan T. "I guess it's just you and me," Sophie joked, attempting to lighten the mood. She grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and handed it to him. "Hold this, or you might lose your seat in the dark." Ryan managed a soft laugh, but underneath, he felt his pulse quicken. This was probably the best chance he'd ever get to open up to her. No other patrons, no distractions, just the thunder outside and the hum of the generator. He had to tell her, he just wasn't sure how. Lightning illuminated the windows in flickering pulses. Rosie, who had been counting tips at a corner booth, decided to call it a day and scurried home. The cook, James Jimmy Park, closed up the kitchen, leaving only a few items ready to serve. Soon it was just Sophie, Ryan, and the crash of thunder outside. Sophie bustled about, cleaning up, but her mind was churning. She sensed Ryan watching her, as though he wanted to say something important. Finally, she mustered the courage to approach booth 9 and sit across from him, resting her elbows on the table. "You seem different today," she said cautiously. "Everything okay?" Ryan hesitated, tapping his fingers on the table's edge. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice tight with anxiety. "Something I've been trying to figure out for a long time." Sophie's heart pounded. The gentle clank of cutlery in the background stopped as Jimmy stepped out to the back room, leaving them in near silence. "All right," she said softly. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." Ryan lowered his gaze, stirring his coffee cup, though it was now empty. Do you know much about your birth family?" he asked, almost stumbling over the words. The question pierced Sophie's calm facade. She blinked, taken aback. "Why would you ask that?" she replied. A knot formed in her stomach, the mention of her birth family dredging up old wounds. No, not really." She paused, studying his face. "How do you know I was adopted?" A wave of unease washed over her. Could he be some sort of stalker? But no, she had never felt threatened by Ryan. There was kindness in his eyes, even now. "I've been looking for someone," Ryan confessed, "for a very long time. Someone I think is my sister." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. Sophie's mouth fell open slightly, shock and confusion playing across her features. The adoption papers. They mentioned a girl named Sofia Garcia, born a year after me. There were rumors she was adopted by a family and later moved to Orlando. I had reason to believe she might work here. The diner's lights flickered again. Sophie's hands began to shake. The tension in the air was thick as thunder boomed outside. "Ah, are you telling me that you think I'm your sister?" Her voice trembled, skepticism laced with trembling hope. She'd spent most of her life believing she had no family, no siblings. Someone like this was beyond her wildest dreams. Ryan nodded, leaning forward, elbows on the table. "Yes. My birth name was Ryan Garcia," he continued, voice hoarse. "I was placed in an orphanage in Chicago, adopted at 10. I started searching for my biological family once I could afford to hire investigators. Everything pointed to you." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes, but she fought to remain composed. So many thoughts collided. Could she have had a brother all along? Was this real or some cruel trick? She recalled the burnt photo with S. Garcia scribbled on the back. If her real surname was Garcia, then it all fit. But how could she be sure? I don't know what to say," she stammered, pressing a hand to her chest as if to steady her heartbeat. Ryan slid a small folder across the table, dampened by the humidity and the storm. Inside were copies of adoption papers, partial birth certificates, and a photograph of a baby boy labeled Ryan Garcia. Sophie's eyes darted over the documents, her mind reeling. She noticed the orphanage name, St. Adelaide Home for Children in Chicago. She recognized a family signature, Angela M. Garcia. She had never seen these forms before, but something about them felt alarmingly authentic. "These are the documents I've compiled," Ryan said softly, feeling a pang of guilt at her distress. "I know it's a lot. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wasn't certain at first. I didn't want to raise your hopes for nothing." Outside, thunder crashed once more, and the windows rattled. Sophie's tears finally escaped, rolling down her cheeks. Memories flooded her mind, her nightmares of an unknown woman, leaving her in a strange place, the flickering glimpses of a boy's face in her earliest recollections that she always believed were figments of imagination. Could it have been Ryan? She looked at him, her breathing ragged. "If you're my brother," she began, but the words stuck in her throat. She was overwhelmed by the notion that she was not alone, that someone in this world shared her blood, her history. Her adoptive parents had been kind, but she'd always felt a missing piece. Never had she imagined that peace might be right here, quietly sipping coffee at booth 9 for 6 years. "All this time," she whispered, almost to herself. 6 years. Ryan nodded, wishing he could reach across the table to hold her hand, but unsure if that was too forward. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know this might feel like a betrayal, but I was afraid. Afraid that you wouldn't want me in your life, or that the truth might hurt you." Sophie's tears turned to trembling laughter, the emotional tension overwhelming her. "I don't know if I'm angry or relieved or in shock," she said, exhaling a shaky breath. "I guess I'm all three." She looked at him with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. "Ryan, right?" She tested the name, letting it slip off her tongue. I guess we need a DNA test or something to confirm, but this all looks pretty convincing." Ryan nodded solemnly. "That's what Mark, my investigator, suggested as well. We can get a paternity test or sibling test done. I didn't want to push it on you until you had some context." She clutched the documents, eyes flicking over them once more. She saw references to a Sofia Maria Garcia, as well as official forms that labeled her as a foundling child. The heartbreak of it all sank in. She and Ryan had likely been abandoned to the foster system at separate times, never to see each other again until now. Sophie felt anger toward the mother who had left them, but also a strange sadness. She wanted answers, yet the answers might never come. Outside, the storm began to relent, thunder growing distant. Inside Sunny's, the generator continued its low hum. The two siblings, if indeed they were siblings, sat in a booth with only a weak overhead light. Their eyes, identical in shape and color, if one looked closely, were locked in a moment of raw vulnerability. Finally, Sophie let out a long sigh. "I think we should do the test," she said softly, "and if it confirms what we think, I'd like to know more about who you are, Ryan. I'd like to know about our family, about us." In the following weeks, Sophie felt as if her life was spinning on a new axis. She and Ryan arranged for a confidential sibling DNA test at a local clinic. Sophie tried to hold herself together as she waited for the results. She told only Rosie, her closest co-worker, who stood in stunned silence when Sophie revealed that Ryan might be her brother. A swirl of speculation ran through Sophie's mind. She pictured growing up with a big brother, playing hide and seek in some small apartment, celebrating birthdays, having that protective presence in her life. She grieved for what could have been, but found hope that a piece of it might still be salvaged. Ryan, meanwhile, attempted to balance his emotional upheaval with his business obligations. Thompson Interstate had just broken ground on a new waterfront luxury complex in Miami, and he needed to be there in person. But he refused to leave Orlando until the test confirmed the truth. He cancelled flights, delayed meetings, and took calls in the corner booth of Sunny's. It was an odd sight to the rest of the staff, this well-dressed man hunched over a phone, scanning spreadsheets and architects' proposals while exchanging the occasional warm glance with Sophie. Finally, the results arrived. The email from the clinic came on a Monday afternoon, jolting Sophie out of her nervous reverie. She hurried to show Ryan. They opened it together in the diner's back office, hearts hammering. A hush fell as they read the words, "Probability of full sibling relationship, 99.98%. The tears of relief and disbelief flowed freely. They were siblings, separated by a system that hadn't cared about their bond, and now they'd found each other again. They emerged from the office in a daze, the rest of the staff looking on in confusion. Rosie, who'd been eavesdropping from behind the door, squealed with excitement, bounding forward to hug Sophie. "You have a brother!" she exclaimed, her squeals echoing in the small hallway. The cook, Jimmy, poked his head out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "So you two, that's... wow." He shook his head, at a loss for words. Over the next days, the diner buzzed with the shocking revelation. Regular customers who had known Sophie for years felt thrilled for her, while also trying to wrap their heads around how the quiet, mysterious Ryan T turned out to be Sophie's flesh and blood sibling. For Sophie, every minute they spent together felt like discovering a new universe, learning about Ryan's childhood in the Thompson household, his rise in real estate, his philanthropic endeavors, and his deep-seated loneliness, which had propelled him to find her. Ryan, for his part, was amazed by Sophie's resilience. He learned about her meager childhood with the Hamiltons, her financial struggles, and her dedication to the diner. He felt a surge of protective instinct, wanting to make up for the lost years by showering her with all the luxuries she'd been denied. But Sophie was quick to clarify that her love wasn't for sale. "I'm grateful you have money," she told him gently, "but what I really want is a sibling, a family." Emboldened by this acceptance, Ryan invited Sophie to visit Chicago with him. He had a lead on their birth mother, Angela M. Garcia, who might still be living in a state-funded housing complex on the city's south side. Sophie hesitated. She had complicated emotions about meeting the woman who had abandoned her, yet curiosity and a desire for closure won out. She agreed to travel. Before they left, Ryan made a significant move that left Sophie breathless. He purchased Sunny's Diner, The establishment had been on the verge of bankruptcy for years. The aging owners, Mr. and Miss S. Randall, were ready to retire but couldn't find a buyer who wouldn't demolish it. Ryan, seeing how much the place meant to Sophie, stepped in. He assured her the staff would remain employed, the diner's charm preserved, and any renovations would keep the spirit alive. Sophie found herself in tears again, touched by his generosity. However, this good news wasn't without drama. Rumors began to swirl that Ryan had ulterior motives. A local Orlando blogger, Erin Myers, wrote a gossip piece insinuating that Ryan Thompson might be using the diner to build a massive corporate chain in downtown, spurring protests among residents. Sophie worried that her new family bond would be overshadowed by negative media attention. Ryan, though furious, kept his composure, determined to prove them wrong. Together, they left Orlando, hearts pounding with anticipation for the next chapter, confronting their birth mother in Chicago. Sophie had no idea what to expect: an apology, hostility, or plain indifference. Ryan, too, braced himself, uncertain whether closure was even possible. All they knew was that they had each other now, and that was a start. The skyline of Chicago loomed ahead as Ryan and Sophie arrived at Midway Airport. For Sophie, it felt like stepping into a memory and a mirage all at once. The city's hustle, the metallic taste of cold air, the rumble of the L train overhead it, all sparked fragments of her earliest recollections. She wondered if it would trigger more vivid images. At times she envied Ryan for remembering more, even if those memories came from an orphanage. They checked into a modest downtown hotel near the Loop, wanting to maintain a low profile. That same evening, Ryan's investigator, Mark Bradley, arranged a meeting in a deserted park on the south side, near the housing complex where Angela M. Garcia allegedly lived. It felt clandestine and dramatic, but caution was necessary. Mark had warned them Angela might not be stable. She might respond poorly to an unexpected reunion. Sophie's nerves were taut as she followed Ryan through cracked sidewalks, past chain-link fences and graffiti-strewn walls. She remembered none of this from her childhood. They arrived at a nondescript apartment building, paint peeling off the walls, broken windows patched with cardboard. Mark met them by the entrance. "She's in apartment 3B, he said quietly. I gave her a heads up that someone wanted to see her, but I didn't give details." The walk up the grimy staircase felt surreal. Sophie's heart thundered in her chest. Ryan paused at the door marked 3B, swallowing hard. He raised his hand and knocked softly. Moments later, the door cracked open. A woman with hollow cheeks and a weary gaze peered out. She clutched a threadbare robe around her, eyes suspicious. "Who are you?" she asked, voice raspy. Ryan cleared his throat. "Angela Garcia?" he asked. She nodded cautiously, scowling at the two strangers. "My name is Ryan," he continued, voice trembling slightly. "And this is Sophie. We believe you might be our birth mother." Angela's eyes widened with shock, then darted to Sophie. A flicker of recognition flitted across her features, but she quickly masked it with a stony glare. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice crackling with defensive hostility. The door remained half-closed, as though she might slam it shut at any moment. Sophie felt an overwhelming wave of conflicting emotions: anger, pain, longing. "We don't want anything," she managed. We want to know why. Why we ended up in orphanages and foster care. Why you never..." Her voice broke. Angela stepped back, breathing shakily. To their surprise, she let them inside. The apartment was cramped and cluttered with old newspapers, half-eaten takeout, and roaches skittering along the baseboards. The stench of stale cigarettes filled the air. She motioned for them to sit on a threadbare sofa while she settled onto a battered recliner. "I don't know what you think you'll accomplish by this," Angela said, rubbing her temples as if warding off a headache. Ryan's jaw clenched. He wanted answers, but also recognized the pain etched into the lines of this woman's face. "Look," he said carefully, "I'm not here to judge you. I've done well in life. Sophie has too, in her own way. But we've always had a hole in our hearts. If you're our mother, we just want an explanation." Angela exhaled, leaning her head back against the recliner. A tear slid down her cheek, but she wiped it away hastily. "I was young," she admitted, voice trembling. "Too young. Their father was gone. I couldn't take care of you both, and I made mistakes. Drugs, men, whatever. Social services took Ryan first, then Sophie a year later. By the time I got clean, it was too late. You were both gone." She squeezed her eyes shut. "I thought you'd be better off without me. I never tracked you down because I didn't think you'd ever forgive me." Sophie burst into quiet sobs, a wave of pent-up sorrow releasing. This woman, who should have been her protector, had failed her so completely. Yet there was something deeply tragic about Angela, how life had beaten her down to the point she felt she couldn't recover. Ryan placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder, tears glistening in his own eyes. Angela opened her eyes, looking at her children, now adults, with a remorseful gaze. "I'm sorry," she murmured, almost inaudible. "I can't change the past. I know I failed you." She sank deeper into the recliner, the weight of years of regret pressing on her. Ryan's voice cracked with emotion. "I spent my childhood wanting a family," he said. "I was adopted by the Thompsons, but it wasn't the same. I built my own life, but I always felt abandoned. Now, you're here, and part of me hates you for letting us go." Sophie trembled beside him, feeling the same confusion and anger swirl within her. Silence reigned for a long moment. The single flickering light bulb in the living room buzzed overhead. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Sophie finally spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "We didn't come here to punish you or demand anything," she said softly. "I guess we just needed to see you, to know where we come from." Angela nodded, staring at the dusty floor. "I have nothing to offer you," she whispered. "No family heirlooms, no big revelations, just a broken life. If you want to hate me, I understand." Ryan inhaled a shaky breath, looking over at Sophie. He could tell she was torn. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand restitution for their stolen childhood. Another part of her just wanted her mother's arms around her. Slowly, he rose to his feet, walking over to Angela. "I don't hate you," he admitted. "I can't say I forgive you easily, but I don't hate you. Maybe you can start over too." The vulnerability in his tone made Angela break down, tears streaming unchecked. She covered her face with trembling hands, shoulders shaking. Sophie joined them, kneeling beside the recliner. The three of them, mother and children, huddled there in a dingy apartment, linked by blood and years of separations. "I'm sorry," Angela repeated over and over, voice cracking. Sophie and Ryan held her gently, tears mixing with hers, a complicated tangle of sorrow and tentative acceptance. Eventually, they all calmed. Ryan quietly offered to help Angela seek better living conditions or rehab support if she needed it. She seemed hesitant, but eventually nodded, expressing a timid gratitude. They exchanged phone numbers, the tension in the room easing slightly. Angela's future remained uncertain, but for the first time, there was a possibility of rebuilding something, no matter how fragile. Leaving the apartment, Sophie felt emotionally drained, yet oddly at peace. She had confronted her origin, and it hadn't destroyed her. Ryan walked beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "We did it," he whispered, voice thick with tears. "We found her, and we survived." Sophie leaned her head against him as they stood on the sidewalk. Chicago's night sky, with its glow of skyscrapers, enveloped them in an urban embrace. "I'm just so grateful you never gave up looking," she admitted, glancing at him through tearful eyes. "I lost a mother, but I found a brother. That's worth everything." After returning from Chicago, life took on a different hue for Sophie. The knowledge of her real heritage and her budding relationship with Ryan fueled her with renewed purpose. She resigned from her waitressing position at Sunny's, though she still visited often, greeting her co-workers like extended family. Ryan suggested she take a managerial role now that he owned the place, but Sophie insisted on stepping back to figure out her own path. She enrolled in night classes at a local community college, determined to chase a business degree that had once been out of reach. She wanted to do more than just serve coffee. She dreamed of possibly running a chain of cozy diners or philanthropic endeavors that helped foster kids. Inspired by her own experiences, she longed to give others the support she'd never received when she was young. Ryan and Sophie's bond deepened. They texted daily, sharing childhood stories, big regrets, and future hopes. Occasionally they visited Angela in Chicago, who was slowly detoxing. It was a long and uphill battle, but she showed signs of genuine effort. The siblings remained cautious. Trauma like theirs doesn't vanish overnight. Yet each phone call or text from Angela felt like one more brick laid in a fragile bridge to reconciliation. The negative rumors about Ryan's intentions for Sunny's died down once he hosted a town hall meeting, inviting local residents to see his renovation plans. He promised to retain the diner's charm, even upgrading the flickering neon sign to a more energy-efficient but still retro-style version. He hired local contractors, boosting employment in the community. The heartfelt acceptance from the Orlando locals warmed Sophie's heart. In a bold and somewhat whimsical gesture, Ryan decided to rename the establishment Garcia and Thompson's Sunny Diner, honoring both their birth name and his adoptive name. At first, Sophie cringed at the attention, but eventually she embraced it as a symbol of unity. She beamed with pride whenever she spotted the newly lit sign shining in bright neon letters. As the months progressed, the siblings spent more time together outside of the diner. Ryan introduced Sophie to a circle of philanthropic entrepreneurs who were equally passionate about community upliftment. Sophie, shy at first, soon blossomed in these social settings, discovering she had a knack for connecting people and ideas. One evening, Ryan even surprised her by inviting Alicia Keys, someone he knew through a charity event, to a fundraiser for foster youth. Sophie was starstruck, reaffirming her sense that the world was so much bigger and more connected than she'd ever realized. Occasionally, her old insecurities returned, especially when she felt overshadowed by Ryan's success or by her own unsteady footsteps in the business world. Yet he was always there with supportive words. "Your strength is empathy," he told her. "It's something money can't buy. We're unstoppable if we combine our skills." Indeed, Sophie was quickly becoming the compassionate face of several charitable initiatives that Ryan funded. For his part, Ryan began to let down the walls he'd built around his heart. He sold off a share of his company, letting his reliable business partners handle daily operations, so he could spend more time focusing on what truly mattered: family, philanthropy, and forging genuine connections. He was no longer just the stoic man sipping black coffee on Tuesday mornings. He was a brother, a mentor, a friend. One sunlit afternoon, Sophie found herself at booth 9 sipping a latte she'd prepared herself, remembering the days when Ryan was just the mysterious Tuesday customer. She smiled at the memory how life could twist fate in astonishing ways. She watched the bustle of the diner, now partially remodeled, the new sign shining outside. Rosie was still there, balancing tables with her usual bubbly banter, while Jimmy had a fancy new kitchen setup that elevated his culinary game. Everything felt transformed, yet the spirit remained the same. Sophie let out a contented sigh. She realized that while some might see their lives as filled with heartbreak and separation, she could also frame it as a story of resilience and hope. They had lost their childhood, but they'd reclaimed their bond, And in doing so, they discovered new purpose not just for themselves, but for everyone around them whose lives they touched. Just when Sophie thought the dust had settled, another twist emerged. A letter arrived one autumn evening, addressed to Sofia Maria Garcia. Inside, a lawyer from a prestigious firm in San Francisco named Cynthia Lewis, Esquire, claimed to represent a man named Joseph Martinez, Angela Garcia's estranged father. According to the letter, Joseph Martinez had recently passed away and left an inheritance that might involve Sophie and Ryan. Shocked, Sophie read aloud the letter to Ryan. They'd never heard of Joseph Martinez. Angela had never mentioned him. The letter explained that Joseph Martinez might have fathered Angela when he was very young, making him the grandparents of both Sophie and Ryan. The entire estate was in probate, with substantial assets in the mix. "This is unexpected," Ryan murmured, rereading the letter. Initially, Sophie felt wary. Could this be a scam? But the lawyer's credentials were legitimate, and soon official court documents confirmed that they stood to inherit a significant sum, potentially millions, unless other heirs contested. Sophie was stunned. She felt a mixture of excitement and dread. Money changed people. It changed families. She didn't want to lose the closeness she'd just found with her brother. Ryan, too, recognized the potential pitfalls. They discussed it candidly. "Let's handle it carefully," he proposed. "We can set up a trust, maybe funnel some into philanthropic work. If this is real, we should use it wisely." Sophie agreed, determined not to let newfound wealth disrupt her personal growth. The entire matter required them to fly to San Francisco, meet with the lawyer, and finalize the paperwork. Angela was also summoned as Joseph Martinez's direct descendant. Nervous about another family reunion, Sophie felt relieved that Angela seemed to be in better spirits. She was in a halfway house program, making significant progress. She too was stunned by the inheritance news, having assumed her father abandoned her decades ago. At the probate hearing, the judge announced that Joseph Martinez had left no direct will acknowledging Angela or her children, but DNA evidence, along with birth records, pointed conclusively to Angela's lineage. The process was complicated, but eventually the court recognized Angela, Sophie, and Ryan as legitimate heirs. A portion would go to settle outstanding debts from Martinez's estate, but the remainder, a considerable sum, would be distributed among them. As Sophie and Ryan walked out of the courtroom, Angela trailing behind, they exchanged a meaningful glance. They had come full circle, from abandoned children scrounging for identity to inheritors of a legacy they never knew existed. In the hallway, Angela pulled them aside, tears in her eyes. "If I could go back, I'd change everything," she whispered. "I wish your grandfather had been there for me, so I could have been there for you." Sophie and Ryan, overwhelmed, could only nod in understanding. In the subsequent months, the inheritance was allocated. As planned, Ryan set up philanthropic funds. Sophie invested in her dream to open a specialized community center for foster youth, complete with counseling services and training programs. She also established a scholarship in David Hamilton's name, honoring her adoptive father, who had given her a loving home during her childhood. Angela chose to move to a better apartment, entering a long-term rehab program. With the help of a counselor, she began volunteering at a local women's shelter, hoping to turn her pain into a source of empathy for others. The relationships among the three remained fragile yet hopeful. They were a scattered family, slowly learning how to be a family again. Through all these changes, Sonny's Diner, now Garcia and Thompson's, remained the heart of the story, a place where they all converged, sharing new memories and bridging the gaps of lost years. Booth 9 was no longer a seat of mystery. It became a symbol of hope, the epicenter of a remarkable reunion that defied the odds. In time, life found a rhythm. Sophie juggled her college studies, the community center project, and frequent catch-ups with Ryan. Ryan devoted himself to philanthropic ventures, splitting his time between Chicago, where he supported Angela's continuing recovery, and Orlando, where he oversaw expansions and philanthropic events with Sophie. The media caught wind of their story. A waitress discovers her long-lost brother is a millionaire. The two reclaim their family identity, and they collectively inherit a fortune. Several newspapers and talk shows clamored for interviews. Sophie felt ambivalent about going public, but Ryan persuaded her to share their tale carefully, focusing on adoption awareness and foster care issues. They appeared on a daytime program hosted by Lila Carter, discussing their emotional journey and the importance of second chances. The public's response was overwhelmingly positive, with many praising Sophie's humility and Ryan's generosity. Donations poured into the community center. People from across the country reached out, sharing their own adoption stories or expressing hope that they, too, might reconnect with lost loved ones. Inadvertently, Sophie and Ryan had become symbols of perseverance and reunion. Of course, there were inevitable complications. The more visible they became, the more opportunists came knocking, seeking to exploit their new status. Old acquaintances of Angela emerged, some with questionable intentions. But with careful legal guidance and unwavering mutual support, the siblings navigated these waters. They leaned on each other, forging a trust no external force could break. Back at Sunny's, daily life continued, only now it bore the mark of change. Rosie took on a shift supervisor role, proud of her friend's accomplishments. Jimmy introduced new menu items, blending local Orlando flavors with Chicago favorites. Regulars like Mrs. Charlotte Brown still ordered their predictable meals, tipping with a smile. Ryan occasionally turned up in the mornings to greet customers and share stories, though he was no longer the silent stranger. The diner was thriving, revitalized not just by funding, but by the intangible energy of hope. For Sophie, one of the most significant personal changes came when she started dating. Always cautious in relationships, she found renewed self-confidence and began going out with James Levine Jr., her landlord's son who'd secretly admired her for months. Encouraged by Ryan, she gave James a chance, discovering a shared sense of kindness and a passion for community work. Though it was early days, she felt something real blossoming there. Angela's progress was slow but steady. She continued therapy sessions, occasionally joining Zoom calls with Sophie and Ryan, apologizing anew when guilt overwhelmed her. Each time, Sophie reassured her that the only way forward was to focus on building a better tomorrow. Past wounds might never fully heal, but they could be overshadowed by new, healthier bonds. As the years rolled on, a unique family dynamic emerged. Ryan juggled fatherly roles with his philanthropic empire. Sophie developed from a shy waitress into a poised community leader. Angela, though scarred by her past, demonstrated her capacity for redemption through consistent action. The memory of separate paths, separate heartbreaks, began to fuse into a cohesive narrative, a saga of family lost and found again. On a crisp winter morning, Sophie stood outside Sunny's with Ryan. They'd come for a small event to celebrate the diner's new partnership with the local foster care program, which would offer job opportunities to teens transitioning out of the system. The siblings exchanged a knowing smile. 6 years ago, they had been strangers. She, a waitress with unfulfilled dreams, he, a lonely millionaire searching for his past. Now they were family, co-visionaries of a brighter future. "I'm proud of you," Ryan murmured, pulling Sophie in for a side hug. She smiled, tears welling up. "I'm proud of us," she corrected. And together, they stepped inside to greet the crowd of supporters and staff, ready to share how they had turned an improbable reunion into a beacon of hope for others. Thank you for joining me on this emotional roller coaster from the humble beginnings of Sunny's Diner in Orlando to the long-lost family ties in Chicago and beyond. Sophie and Ryan's story reminds us that life can surprise us in the most extraordinary ways. Through heartbreak and triumph, they discovered that true family isn't just who raises you, but who stands beside you when it matters most. We've seen them rebuild old wounds into a future filled with hope, compassion, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you incredible true-to-life tales that inspire and uplift. Together, let's spread the message that even in the darkest moments, there's always a lighter chance to find the family we need, even if it takes a lifetime to see it.